people tend to just jump in. Like the internet is the worst, is the greatest blessing and the worst curse for people looking to buy a business. It's a blessing because you get a lot of information. There's business for sale websites, that type of thing. And it's a curse because there's lots of information and there's business for real websites. And there's a lot of garbage information and generic information, or people screaming about materials and educational materials that are very misleading, ridiculously expensive. People have a tendency, they'll spend an inordinate amount of time just searching through countless business for sale listings. And they're not prepared, they're not educated, they have no expertise. They've not had any preparation.
Yo, welcome to another episode of the Founder Podcast. Today, I am joined by Mr. Richard Parker. This guy is uber accomplished in the M&A world. He has acquired 13 businesses on his own, sold 12 of them, and served as an advisor to many thousands of different people. He sold 100,000 copies of his book on, remind me of the name of it. It's How to Buy a Business.
How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price.
How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price. And anybody that's an entrepreneur wants to know the answer to that question. So I'm super excited to having Richard on the podcast. Just so you know a little bit of his accomplishments, this guy worked directly with Ray Dalio and his family, really good friends with one of Ray Dalio, with the late Ray Dalio's son. And we're really excited to just hear his experiences, his stories. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you very much. I wish I could do my introduction as exciting and as enthusiastic as your yo, but I will tell you that I'm crazy excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, you're awesome. So I'm really excited just to kind of hear the story. What got you going in the entrepreneurial space? You know, how many years, like at what point did you know you were an entrepreneur, that you wanted to go and acquire businesses and then later teach people how to do that?
Okay, so well, I believe I was always an entrepreneur. I probably didn't know the word at the time, but since I was a young kid growing up in Montreal, always had jobs or businesses on the go, 10, 12 years old, 13 years old. And then after school, I went to work for a consumer products company in Canada. And we were in the toy business, a high-flying company, doing great, publicly traded. I was in a position that was probably way over my head, but we were growing at the speed of light. And so we were putting people into place, or they were putting people into place to manage the growth. And I was doing well. I was still in my 20s. I was, the good news was I was growing like crazy. This is, I'm 62, so this is in the 1990s. I was 29 years old. I was making $72,000 a year.
That's a lot of money in the 90s.
That was a lot of money. It's still a reasonable income. And so that was the good news. The bad news is, through my brilliance, I managed to invest money in the stock market and pissed away $60,000 and was completely broke. And so at that point, I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this hole, right? So I'm either going to go put it on 17 black on Vegas and I don't gamble, or I'm going to try to win it through the lotto and I don't buy lotto tickets. So I realized that the only way I'm going to get there is I've got to go into my own business. So my then wife was pregnant with our first child and said, I've got to get into my own company, which I did. I took on a line of consumer products in the same area that I was experienced, and more important, what I believed that I was an expert in. And shortly after that, I started acquiring ancillary businesses that would complement that business. So I was selling to retailers, and then I acquired a retail service company that was a small company. I couldn't afford to buy it, but I convinced the then owner, who was based in a different part of Canada, to join me, and then we could build something special. He came on board and started buying.
What is a retail service business? I'd love to hear a little more detail on that.
Okay, I apologize. So let me explain that, because it's pretty simple, and most people probably aren't even aware that type of business exists. When products are sold to retailers, Walmart's, Target's, Home Depot, what have you, but especially more so in Canada, where they have far less store level personnel. The challenge for manufacturers who are supplying these retailers has always been, and remains to this day, getting the merchandise from the back room onto the sales floor where it's supposed to be. And certain times you have national ads that are breaking. The merchandise is sitting in the back room because people can't even get it onto the floor properly. Or right. You have a a 4-foot section of product and 30% of the products are out of stock, and the replenishment system is just not adequate to get the right merchandise to the right stores. Retail merchandising companies have a staff of people that go into the retail stores. Some of them take merchandise physically from the back, place it on the shelves. Other ones will place advertising displays or take inventory and generate a purchase order to replenish the stores. So in our case,
Wow.
in Canada, you really had a low employee count. And what was happening was I was doing these great programs with retailers across Canada. And then I'd go into the store and I couldn't find my stuff. So like, it was great that I sold it in, but it doesn't mean anything until it goes through the cash register, right? And
Right.
so this retail merchandising company was a small company in the east coast of Canada, and brought them on board. I started doing it in a very, very small way where I was based, brought them on board, then rolled up a bunch of other companies in a similar industry, doing the same thing or close to that throughout the country, because Canada's a big country, and amalgamated and took that, what was, and pardon my French, a shitty little business, and we turned it into a $4.5 million company, which was ridiculously profitable because all we were selling was labor. I mean, we had no cost of
Right.
goods, right? We had 200
Wow.
people visiting
Straight
stores across
service. Yeah.
Canada. I think at one point we were probably doing about service to about 5,000 stores.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. And so did you end up selling off this business, or what was the exit there?
That business I actually gifted to my brother.
Oh, wow.
My
Cool.
brother was my partner, and when I sold my other business, um, I sold a business to Sega of America and relocated to Florida, and I gave my brother the business.
That's
He
cool.
was one of the partners.
That's cool. So over your experience, right? You've acquired 13 different businesses. Like, tell us some of the things, some of the really the answer to your book, right? How to go in and acquire a business at a good price. Like, tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, my strategy, when I look back at the time, I didn't think it was really smart or even a strategy, but when I look back, it was actually quite intelligent for someone who, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. But what happened was my first acquisition, the first business that I actually started, and then acquired some shortly thereafter. It was doing pretty well. I was a young guy I think it was generating about $100,000 a year in income, which is nice at the time, which was the mid 1990s. But it's still expensive to run a business, but it was still profitable. And as I started buying other businesses, the retail servicing business, then I bought a infant products company, an importer, and then an Asian trading company. They were all ancillary businesses. And in other words, they were all businesses that I could either tuck into what I was currently doing and had the same client base, or they were additional products that I could sell to the same client base. Because one thing that I read
Right.
early on, I think it was a book by Tom Peters, who wrote Thriving on Chaos, an old book, classic book. But I believe the number at that point, they were saying that, a customer there's a 60% greater chance that an existing customer will buy from you versus going out and getting a new customer. And that really resonated with me. So I tagged on these ancillary businesses. And from an economic standpoint, I never took money out of the businesses. I lived on the first business. So I never went crazy, even though the businesses were doing well. I didn't adjust my lifestyle upwards because I was making more money. I kept putting money back into the business to grow the businesses. And that, if I had to pinpoint one single thing, would be that, in the growth of additional businesses, would be the fact that I never drained the businesses. I just used them. I kept reinvesting in the business. And then what ultimately happens, as you know, if you put $1 back into the business instead of taking it out, if it turns into another $1 of profit, you sell it at a multiple down the road, 3, 4,
Right.
5 times, sometimes more. So, I mean, the math is always so simple that people don't understand. Live on a certain amount and then plow it back in the business to grow.
Right. So yeah, really build that overall enterprise value by building the business rather than just sucking it dry as a cash cow. That's
Correct.
exactly right. So what are some strategies that you used in acquiring these businesses? How did you typically structure the deals? Were you paying cash up front? Was it put it out, valued as a multiple and seller finance over the next 3 years? Like, how did you do those type of acquisitions?
One of the things that, in trying to answer that question and at the same time provide some valuable information to your listeners is to understand that I've always believed that you want to buy a good business. I've never been interested in buying distressed businesses or garbage businesses. And
Right.
I understand that there's a whole sector of people that either preach that or do that. I just don't believe in that because there's a reason why it's a garbage business or a distressed business, and most inexperienced people are not capable of turning around a distressed business because they have to put a lot more money.
Right.
So with that said, from a structural standpoint, making sure, number one, that the business was right for me, my best skill. I've developed 5 golden rules over the year that every business I buy must comply with. That's my own personal criteria, so I make sure it fits that model. I'm happy to explain that in a second if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd love to hear those. I'd love to hear the 5 criteria that you look at. That will definitely
Okay,
help the audience.
So for me, and understand these are my 5 rules, right? They're not
Yeah.
yours. They're my 5 rules. And I never will look at a business that has 4. It's got to have all 5. And these are developed and they're specifically related to my skills. And everybody needs to develop their own 5 rules, which tie in to their skill set, because that's the most important thing when you acquire a business. Whatever it is that you do best has to be the single most important driving factor of any business, of the revenue and profits of any business you consider purchasing. So from my standpoint, my 5 golden rules are number 1, it's got to be a sales and marketing driven business. Why? Because that's what I'm good at. I mean, I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm good at that. And I have a lot more weaknesses and strength, but I'm good at sales and marketing. Number 2, I want a business that has high margins. I don't care about the revenues, because if it has high margins and I'm a good sales and marketing guy, I'll get the sales up and the profit will surely follow. The third thing that I want is I want a business where there's demand in place for the product or service. I don't mind competition. I don't want to go out and create demand to try to make people aware of what this product is. I want demand in place because it's too damn expensive to try to create demand, no matter how much information may be available to consumers. Number 4 is I don't want a business that competes solely on price, because I don't believe that that's a sustainable model. Businesses where you have to go back into business every day, that's literally what you're doing for the rest of the time that you own that business. You can never build something. You're back in business every single day. You start at the start line again, as opposed to progressing towards the finish line. I also like a business as a 5th thing that has an element of exclusivity, whether it to be the product, the service, the territory, something in place that no one else has or no one else locally has, or there's a point of difference. That's a competitive advantage. It may be a moat, but there's an element of exclusivity, maybe a little better mousetrap, that type of thing. So those are my 5: sales and marketing driven. It's got to have high margin, demand in place, don't compete in price, and an element of exclusivity. I have like a 6th and 7th, which I like recurring revenue or less employees, but it doesn't matter. I don't care if it has a 6th and 7th. Those 5, I will never, ever, ever, ever sway from those, ever, no matter
I
what.
love that. I love that. I think those 5 rules are just like they're the same ones that I have, right? Because it sounds like me and you have very similar skill sets from a sales standpoint. From being really good at that, loving the good high margin businesses, and really understanding that like price shouldn't be the key differentiator. And your other 2, I love that. So with that being the case, are you typically, when you're advising acquisitions or whatnot, are you typically liking to have the ownership stay in place, the previous ownership stay in place as a management team, completely replace them and move them out of the business? What are you typically advising in that type of scenario?
There's some cases where I've kept owners in place, not many. Typically in the businesses in the lower category, smaller businesses, which are hard to necessarily define, but let's call them businesses that are generating $1 million to $10 million in profit. Some are even lower. I mean, a ton of my clients who've used the material are buying businesses for $50,000 or $100,000. But in the cases of those in the smaller end, typically it's not a private equity type acquisition or rollover. The owner, you're replacing, you're becoming the owner operator. I haven't in all cases, but typically you become the owner operator. You assume their chair. So you want them for a transitional period. But one thing that's really interesting in the smaller businesses, which typically lack a lot of sophistication, right? Whether it be books, records, processes, procedures, people, etc. The quicker you can learn that business and get the owner out, the better off you are. I mean, you've got to put your stamp on it. You got to make it your business. Don't be, egotistical that you could learn this business in 2 weeks. You can't. I mean, you walk in the first day, you don't even know where to turn on the lights, right? But so it takes a little bit of transition time. But the faster you can get the guts of that business in your belly and make all the decisions, you buy a business, you're the new sheriff in town, and that's it. And everybody has to understand that and get the old owner out as quick as possible. I have done ones where owners have stayed, but it's only if they've brought a really high level of value to the business.
Right.
That's the only
Right.
time they stay. And most, and if they have second tier management, that's great. I mean, that I have no problem with.
Nice. So do you typically buy 100%? You advise on 100% acquisitions, so they're not rolling forward any of their equity or having alignment with the new management group?
Well, for individuals that are looking to acquire a business, some of them may not be in the financial position to acquire 100% of the business, and so acquire majority control, right? You can keep the owner there or not there, and they could just get a distribution at the end of the year. But sometimes it's just not affordable for many individuals looking to acquire a business to acquire the whole thing. So you can buy 60% and then 8% a year over the next 5 years out of profits or what have you. I prefer to buy 100%. I certainly would never buy 50. I don't want to be a 50% owner either way, because then in a smaller business, that's a recipe for disaster in most cases. You can't get anything done. If there's two active partners, I mean, there's the possibility that there's a standstill, like with every major decision, right? And so I try to avoid that. But wherever possible, you want to buy full control or 100% ownership. Yes.
And then as far as getting the deal done, do you typically structure where it's an owner finance deal over time? Do you finance it through debt, 100% cash up front? Like what type of direction do you prefer in that scenario?
Well, unless it was an unbelievable deal, I would never pay 100% cash, because I want the seller's proverbial kahunas on the line to back up and have some skin in the game, so that whatever they've represented, they're going to think twice about the representations while they have a little bit of skin in the game. So unless there was a massive discount, I would never buy 100%, never pay 100% cash. As far as structure is concerned, I love seller financing. I've never bought a business without it. 91% of our clients actually have a component of seller financing. There's there's a tremendous amount of positives to going that route. However, there's also deals related to SBA financing, which could become very attractive, right? Because the leverage is unbelievable, right? It's like a 9-to-1 leverage, and the criteria for SBA financing has been reduced greatly recently, so that has become even more attractive. As long as you can deal with the securities or whatever they have to put into place, but you never have to pay 100% for a business, no matter what the seller tells you. Even if they tell you they're not financing, they're financing, because that's the only way deals get to the finish line. And so a combination that my preference is a huge component of seller financing. But as the drop down to that, I have an advantage with seller financing than someone who's never bought a business, because I have a track record, right? And so a seller would be more inclined to bank on an individual who has more experience operating businesses related to the financing than someone who's never done that. However, seller financing is the norm. It'll get you to the finish line. Debt is really expensive now, so it's not even an option for many people. And so seller financing is even more prominent than it used to be. And there's such magical upheaval in the market right now. It's wonderful, right? Because of interest rates, it forces it impacts and helps the buyer, right? I mean, buyer terms are much more favorable now because of all the uncertainty.
So typical, I mean, what's the type of structure that you like with this seller financing? Is it, a earn out over the next 12 months? Is it a 3-year finance? Like what do you typically recommend for a standard deal?
So the prevailing interest rates could be reduced substantially, should be at least 30 to 50% lower than what the interest rates are, because the seller can charge you whatever they want. I prefer to get a longer term. I'll pay a higher interest rate to get a longer term, because it gives me the use of the cash. So ultimately, may pay a little more, but I have the immediate use of the cash. So the interest rates, you can negotiate down pretty favorably, but it never really frightens me as long as I get a longer term. And I'm very much the ilk of, hey, I'll pay your price, you just take my terms, right? Because I'm going to work on the term side. And so, But as general rules, you should be able to get 30 to 50% seller financing at least. At least. This whole concept of buying businesses for no money down, cash flowing $500,000 a year, closing the deal in 30 days, that is like smoking crack. Okay, that just doesn't work. I know it's like all over the internet. I know people are promoting that, but I tell you, I'm doing this for 30 years and I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of businesses and I've done it once, right? So if you want to spend the next 30 years trying to find that once, yeah, it's doable. If you want to buy a business in the next year, forget about it, right?
I love it. Love that. So
I like that
yeah,
type of structure.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So tell us a little bit more about the SBA loans with interest rates or whatnot. Are SBA loans kind of out the window, or are they still a good option? I know you said that the leverage with these are 9-to-1. Tell us a little bit more detail about the SBA loans.
So the first thing is I would advise anyone, there's, the granular details on everything are on SBA.gov. And I also have, if any of your listeners ever want to get in touch with me, there's some good resources that I could provide for them to give them some real granular information. But like from a 30,000 foot view, yes, you've got a 9-to-1 leverage. The amount of that a buyer has to put down, which could be a combination of buyer's equity or a seller note, is around 10% now. A seller can remain in the business with a small percentage, whereas before they couldn't be. You could bring in outside investment, I believe, and I want to be correct, but I believe it's like up to around 20% without them having to sign personally. So there's all these components that make it really attractive now, which are things that they've had to do to generate more loans and also to compensate for the higher interest rates. An SBA loan is based on prime plus about 2.25 to 2.75 is the max. So if you look at the Wall Street Journal prime today, I mean, the loan could be 11.25, 11.5%, which is pretty big, right?
Right.
I'm not predicting where interest rates are going. I have enough trouble figuring out what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes, but I don't know where they're going. But they probably won't go up that much. And the possibility always exists to refinance at some point. Plus, the SBA loans are 10-year loans.
Right. Which a lot of the times is much longer than your traditional type business loans, right? Traditional type business loans will be
Correct.
3, 5, or 7 years. Yeah.
Exactly, because the seller typically wants their money early. But I did a deal with someone where they were so hell bent on selling their business for $1 million, right? And I came in my valuation, I think it was about 875 or 900,000. They were so hell bent on selling it for $1 million, they wouldn't budge. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me. It's like, and I developed a proprietary valuation formula that's like the industry gold standard now, right? And it's been used, and it's the stress test with thousands of businesses. I use that in every other factor. And I kept coming to like that 875, 9.25, something like that. And I could not get this person to budge. And then in a nice casual conversation, as we were talking, because it's always good to have these casual conversations with sellers, not to be negotiating all the time, because you get great information from them when their guard is down. And I realized, in something that they said, he'd always dreamed of selling his business for $1 million.
Absolutely.
So just so he could boast to his buddies that he sold his business for $1 million. So I said, okay, no problem. I'll pay you $1 million. I want a 30-year note. He agreed.
Wow. It was all for bragging rights.
It was all for bragging rights. And interestingly enough, in every deal, there's almost always one of those, either bragging rights or one issue that buyers and sellers both have. It's like the bee in the bonnet. It's like they got something buzzing around their cap that they just get neurotic about. They're not even logical. Like you can't have an articulate conversation with them. It's irrational, but they have this thing in their head that for whatever it is, and you can't get past it. So you have to figure out how. Like that's the hot button. And in this case, that was it. So, when you were talking about into the original question about terms and structure, it varies greatly, but you can, the terms is what you want to focus on, right? Because the price, if you're buying a good business, spending an extra couple of $100,000 over the time that you're going to own it and sell it for a multiple doesn't work out to a hill of beans.
Right.
If you're getting a rock solid platform to build.
It's so interesting. So I'm not sure for those that have followed me on social media, I spent the last 3 weeks out at Harvard as part of a owners presidents management group. It's 160 owners from throughout the world that come in. We live together. We spend time together. It's phenomenal. One of my favorite classes that they teach there is there's an old private equity guy that teaches negotiation, right? And the negotiation, it's so interesting, like how much emotion goes into a negotiation outside of logic, right? Like there's, to speak to this exact story, right? That somebody is so bent on getting $1 million, they don't even care how they get the million, as long as they can brag it and it's an emotional tie or whatever. And I've done a handful of acquisitions myself, and this always tends to be the case. There's always an emotional factor that you have to figure out what's the underlying, and then you can give on a couple things that really don't matter to you to help them get exactly what they want. And it was interesting. We did a mock negotiation at Harvard, and my role, I had to try to protect my friend's interest, and it was nothing more than about our relationship, right? It had nothing to do with the financial outcome of the business or anything else, but I had to somehow, because like that kind of stuff is real. There's so much emotion when you're negotiating.
The way you explained it is spot on. And I don't think, just for lack of experience, that most people have a sense of the appreciation for that, because oftentimes, that part overtakes the rest of the discussion related to a deal. So when you're looking at businesses, like, the easiest part is the numbers, right? The numbers are the numbers. Numbers don't lie, people lie. So once you get the numbers, you know what they are, and you can determine a valuation, excuse me, that's done and over with. Excuse me. It's all the other pieces, and the emotional component to it is massive. And one of the things that I really try to impress upon people is, when you're going through these discussions with the seller, as long as you've made the determination that the type of business is the right business to fit with your skill set, you like the business, you remain keenly interested in acquiring it, the conversations that you want to have with the seller are more casual. You want to keep their guard down. But your number one agenda is, once you get to the point where, again, you like the business, you could see yourself running it, you like the seller, you trust the seller, if you want to impress them, right? So, because if they make the decision that you're the person to buy their business, you dictate the deal terms. They're cooked at that point. And I've seen it time and time again with in my own situation, with buyers I've represented, in situations where I've represented sellers. I've had meetings where a buyer has come in, I'm representing a seller, and the buyer leaves, and the seller says, that's the person I want to buy my business. At that point, the seller's cooked, right?
Right.
They can dictate any terms, because it's their legacy. They see part of themselves, the perpetuation of their good work. And so have that understanding philosophically related to the negotiation, that is, if you were to break it down to the 80-20 rule, 20% is the numbers.
Right.
The rest of the 80 is, is the business right for me? Has a good future? What is the competition like, etc. But understanding the dynamic and the interaction with the seller, because at the end of the day, if a buyer and seller get along, they like and trust each other, one wants to buy, one wants to sell, you can't stop them from doing a deal. But this negotiation piece, and some people get so intimidated and concerned and worried about negotiating, like it's like they go into panic mode. And it's just a real good conversation, and having the strength. It doesn't matter. You could lose every battle, win the war.
Absolutely.
Give up points.
Absolutely.
There's not those minor points are negligible. It's amazing how often you can give into a small point to get a major concession.
Oh yeah.
Right. But don't get not everything is a deal breaker. Not everything is a line in the sand. It's a give and take, and you have to be fluid with it and be accommodating. And that's how you get to the finish line. And it's having that philosophy that also helps you run a business better. Because if not, if you turn every incident into a catastrophe.
Right. Now that is such good just value in going in, negotiating, acquiring, running a business like that right there. What you shared, phenomenal. Thanks for sharing that. Let's shift gears. I want to hear a little bit more about your story working with the Dalos. Obviously, Ray Dalio is like the godfather or superstar of private equity and investing, and a lot of people give him massive respect. So you've interacted and worked with the family. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, so people do give him massive respect because he's earned it and deserves it. I worked with the family back in 2007. I was hired as to help raise eldest son Devin. At that point, looked to acquire a business who's based in Florida. The decision was ultimately made that he was going to go join the family office, which we were just starting.
Real quick, time out.
Yeah.
How did they get in touch with you? Was it because of your book? Like what made Richard Parker the guy that we want to work with our son? Or did you have a previous relationship? Give us a little bit more of the background there.
No previous relationship. I was recommended to Ray through a colleague in Florida, that when they were doing their research, and his son Devin was doing the research as to who can help on the buy side, because there's very few buy side representatives and there were far less then. And I had written the book on the material and spoken to Ray. Had called me. I didn't know who he was. So I got a call one day and he said who he was. I had no idea who the guy was. This was back in 2007. My very in-depth work with him was much more recent than that, which I'll touch upon. But he introduces himself and he said I was referred to him and he would like to hire me to help his son learn how to buy a business, because I had a lot of material related to buying a business. And I told him at that point, I said, look, at that point, my youngest son had just been diagnosed with epilepsy. And I had told him, I said, look, I'm not taking on any new clients. My son was just diagnosed with epilepsy. I know nothing about this condition or disease. I'm going to take off the next few months to learn about it, because I really need to become comfortable with an understanding of what my boy is facing and what our family is facing. And Ray had said to me, look, he said, no, I totally understand. He said, and by the way, he said, I have some really good connections with some medical people. If I could be of any assistance to you whatsoever, please let me know. I'm happy to make introductions for you or referrals, whatever you need. It was just such a kind gesture. And again, I have no clue who this guy is, right? And I really appreciated it. And I said, you know what, at the very least, I'll meet with your son, right? And I met Devin and I really, really liked him. This was a really nice kid, really smart. And when I say kid, he was about 29 at the time, really nice, really smart, really keen on acquiring a business. And so we set up a program that I started to teach him how to buy a business. And we would meet weekly. We went through my course, chapter by chapter. We did exercises, which is what Ray wanted. It's all about the learning. And then we went and visited businesses. And he was one of the quickest studies that I've ever met. I mean, he was just a brilliant guy. And as brilliant as he was nice. And then the family, and him and I worked together for about 6 months. And then they decided the family office was opening up and decided that he would go in and work with the family office. I had no idea what a family office was. And it was only probably 5 or 6 months into this relationship where something was said at one point about, I think it was Devin might have said something about his family, whatever. And I sort of like something hit me like this might be like a pretty substantial family, right? And I'm not a guy.
Wait, you're telling me it wasn't until like 6 months into this relationship that you finally realized, like, holy crap, I'm dealing with like somebody pretty awesome.
I think it might have been longer, but it was at least 6 months. It might have been 7 or 8. Yeah. And then I sort of I don't know if it was I Googled him or whatever. Like when it was like, holy shit, okay. And the thing was, like, understand that I was dealing with Devin, right. And he was such a down-to-earth guy. I mean, I never would put one. He was never a bragger. I never put one, 2 and 2 together, as they say, to draw any conclusions. And the other thing is, like, I don't care about that stuff. Like, it never even enters my mind. Like, people are people. Like, that's the end of it. Right. And so he decided to join the family office. It was a good decision at that point. Ray was incredibly appreciative. He paid me incredibly well. And even long after, he kept sending me gifts every month as a thank you. He was so appreciative. Wow. He was such a nice guy. But I hadn't met Ray. I'd spoken to him a couple of times. And then Devin and I stayed in touch. And he worked his way up to become the co-CEO of the family office. When he joined, there was about 5 people. I think now there's probably 125 or 150 people, maybe more. And then in 2017, he decided, Devin, that he wanted to leave his role as the co-CEO and he wanted to start to acquire some businesses. He was also contemplating moving to Florida, and he had told his dad that he was going to get in touch with me, which his dad was all in favor of. I was in the midst of moving my M&A practice to another company, and so the timing was like terrible and terrific. Ray called me on a Sunday afternoon, said, Devin's interested in doing this. What is it going to take to get you on board to do this? And
Time out.
and
Time out. Let's I want to recap this thing because this is phenomenal. This is grade A education on how to network and build relationships. And I'm going to recap it here. So one, create content. Create content around what you are best in class at. And Richard wrote a book and he had a great program and he did all these things, right? And Richard had good experience and but he basically positioned himself as a master or a guru in the space of buy side acquisitions. And he did it through creating content. And because of that content, he was introduced into different circles, Ray Dalio being one of them. But I think this is a key. When he was introduced into these circles, he didn't treat these guys any different than he did any normal human being, right? He treated them as a friend. He helped educate them. He never put them up on a pedestal. And because of that, he established a relationship of trust, right? Trust as a professional because he had the content, trust as a human being because he was a genuine good guy and didn't wasn't fanboying the Dalios, and just stayed in contact over time until ultimately, we're talking 10 years later, he's got Ray Dalio on the phone, calling him up, asking him to do him a favor, right? Like when you got a guy like Ray Dalio asking you to come and be a part of something, that's when you've made it and that you've done the networking thing right. You aren't, and probably most importantly is that, as you can see, Richard is just an authentic dude, right? Like there's nothing high and mighty about Richard. He's not snubbing his nose at people. He doesn't put people into different brackets. People are people. Like, this is grade A networking, ladies and gentlemen. And if you want to develop better relationships, treat people like people. Don't treat them like superheroes. Don't treat them like just be genuine, be loving and kind. And eventually, if you stay in contact and you create good relationships, they're going to come around. And Mr. Ray Dalio might be calling you up on the phone.
Well, pretty good summary, and I appreciate the compliments. That's very kind to you. So we have this nice conversation, and and to dovetail on what you're saying, Ray is just, I consider him an extended family member. We've become very, very close. He's just a regular guy, and the same way that you talked about, how people get treated, he treats people the same way. He treats people respectfully. He appreciates education. He appreciates people being brutally honest with him. I think they refer to it at Bridgewater as radical transparency, but he appreciates honesty and sincerity, and he's just a wonderful guy, great guy. And so we sat on the phone on that Sunday and says it was one of these, like, what is it going to take to get you here? And I certainly wasn't a pig by any means. I thought it was an interesting opportunity, and we ended up putting a deal together pretty quickly. And instead of Devin relocating to Florida, we worked out of the Northeast. I commuted from Florida to New York for a few years. And Devin and I worked together, and our goal was to learn about, we were going to acquire a lot of small businesses, but we had the blessing to be able to learn about a lot of different things and decide where it is that we wanted to play. And so that was comes from higher up of Ray, very specifically saying, learn about a bunch of different stuff and see where it is that you want to direct yourself. So we had unbelievable support from the family office. We didn't interact with Ray regularly, of course, because we were
right.
Stood up by the family office. They were our greatest cheerleaders. They have unbelievably talented people. They're all genuine. I mean, it was you meet one person nicer than the next, and all bright and all caring, and we're cheering for Devin and I, of course. And we had our own offices outside in Greenwich, Connecticut, and one in the city. And we made a number of investments. And Devin and I worked together. We shared an office. Our desks were face to face, and we developed, what went from originally like a transactional relationship to a real personal relationship.
That's so cool.
He and I did a lot of good things in business, but we became tight like brothers. I mean, just incredibly close. And he was, the combination of the kindest, smartest man I ever met. And it was just a beautiful relationship. And when we wanted to make an investment, we had investment committee, we had to present it by Ray or the trustees or what have you. So we didn't get favorable treatment, notwithstanding the fact that everybody wanted to see us succeed. We had an advantage, of course, because we didn't have to go out and raise money, but we weren't given ridiculous carte blanche. But the support that we had was unbelievable. And more importantly, when I look back at that time, besides the incredible learning, is the relationship that Devin and I had was just unbelievable. There was nothing we didn't share with each other. It was the most magical partnership, because the element of trust that we had between each other, like we would take a bullet for each other, right? And it was based on truth and trust and respect and kindness. And after COVID hit, I came back to Florida. He and I were working on Zoom for a while, and then unfortunately on December 17th, 2020, Devin was killed in a car accident. Sorry.
So sad.
So, young guy, 42 years old, and with a 3-year-old daughter, and an incredible guy. So subsequent to them, of course, from the business side was immaterial, and I couldn't even imagine what a family goes through losing a child. I have 4 kids. I can't even get my head around the thought of even thinking about that. So now, if the conversation, your questions related to the family and I are very close. We speak regularly. We get together, regularly to honor Devin, and we talk frequently. They're incredible people. It's the loss that it shows you. It doesn't matter what you have. A loss of that magnitude, it doesn't have financial prejudice, right? It cuts the knees off of anybody, no matter what their financial situation is. And so since that time, I never, to your earlier question, I'm sorry to be long-winded. I could never pay Devin enough honor if we don't have enough time to even do that. But, I was always in awe of Ray's accomplishments, right? Because you can't help but be in awe of his accomplishments, but I've never been in awe of him, right? Like as greater than thou person. I'm not like that with anybody. I have one person up above that I hold in the highest esteem, and then that's the end of it. And he's just, he's my buddy's dad, right? And he's just a regular guy, and his parents, his mom, his siblings. I mean, the entire family is, Ray and his wife have done an incredible job of raising their boys, because they're all humble, accountable, productive, philanthropic, kind. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, just so unaffected, and use their way and use their position in the world and their resources to better the world. I mean, they're an incredible family, incredible. I mean, I love them dearly. I mean, it's just that whole event was just. Devin's still my picture on my screensaver. Him and I had a Zoom call every day. I reenact it most days, where I'll have a Zoom call with him, because he was an incredible. I learned as much from him. I was hired to mentor him, but he probably taught me as much as I taught him. And it's just a very unfortunate set of events that what the outcome was.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Death is such a difficult thing to deal with, and you sharing that in just a beautiful way to honor Devin. I think thank you for sharing that. Richard, man, it's been a fun one. Just hearing your story, hearing the different strategies and everything that you have in acquiring businesses. I know you, to shift gears, and it's really tough to shift away from Devin, because you just shared something very emotional and heart wrenching. Makes my heart hurt even thinking about it, or putting myself in that scenario. What are, as business owners that are acquiring businesses, what are like some common pitfalls, mistakes that are made in the acquisition process that you can give to our listeners and give us some better feedback?
You're talking about people that already own a business and are looking to acquire additional business along that in that world,
or just even people that are in the acquisition game, right? Like that are trying to go out and try their hand at buying a business. What are some pitfalls that should be avoided?
Well, there's a few of them. The go, you know, the single biggest reason, and the stats in this industry are horrific, right? And before I jump into that, first of all, I appreciate your kind words very much about Devin, and I know there's there's a role related to this conversation that we want to inform people, but I really appreciate the departure and your kind words. So thank you very much again for that, and hopefully share Devin's story a little bit. I appreciate given the floor to talk about that. Um, Pivoting a little bit to the business buyers, there's a number of common mistakes that are made. The statistics in this industry are terrible. And by that I mean 90%, and this is an industry statistic, over 90% of the people who begin the search to buy a business never complete a transaction.
Wow.
And that's for a whole host of reasons, and including the following. People tend to just jump in. Like the internet is the worst, is the greatest blessing and the worst curse for people looking to buy a business. It's a blessing because you get a lot of information. There's business for sale websites, that type of thing. And it's a curse because there's lots of information and there's business for real websites. And there's a lot of garbage information and generic information, or people screaming about materials and educational materials that are very misleading, ridiculously expensive. People have a tendency, they'll spend an inordinate amount of time just searching through countless business for sale listings, and they're not prepared, they're not educated, they have no expertise, they've not had any preparation, and so they just spend their time running around like it's like if you had a bunch of people at a starting gate at a race and the gun goes off, everyone runs in different directions. No one even knows where the finish line is, right? And so that's like a big problem, and it's so big that's why the statistics are so dismal. I mean, I'm thrilled to report that 82% of our clients buy a business in 6 months, so that's a good thing. But this lack of or jumping in without a plan is a massive problem. The second thing is you have to get in tune with the type of business that's right for you. Most people don't know. I'm going to go look. Oh, I've always been interested in buying a X. Well, nothing in your background qualifies you for running an X. You may want to own a restaurant because you love cooking, but you know nothing about operating a restaurant. Okay, or someone has a hobby, an avid golfer, and they want to buy a golf store. Well, what the hell do you know about running a golf store, right? Like zero. Okay, and so and the problem is, like, if you try to turn a hobby into business, like you quickly learn to hate your hobby, because like while you're out working in the store, all your buddies are going and playing golf, right? And so the lack of knowledge and preparation and education, people thinking that they just go out and find something and get help from a business broker, an attorney, or accountant. I mean, that's nonsense, right? And or they get tidbits of generic information on the internet, which are completely useless. And so the goal is you first have to identify what business is right for you. What is your greatest strength? Not your experience. It doesn't matter what industry you worked in. It doesn't matter if it was aerospace or healthcare or hospitality. Is what is it that you did in that industry that really made you special? What is your number one skill? Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it logistics? Is it dealing with people? Is it building a team? Is it putting a plan into effect? Is it logistics? Whatever that skill set is, you have to marry with the right business. So when you can identify the type or types of businesses that are right for your skill set, that's the place to start, as opposed to looking at hundreds of businesses and trying to figure out which, if any, are right for you. That's completely ass backwards. So you got to educate yourself, and you got to first learn what business is right for you. And the third thing is this philosophy: you're going to find the perfect business, because it doesn't exist. I worked with a guy's name was Jerry Efros. He was a tail gunner in World War II. Sat in the bubble, in the back, the glass bubble, if you've seen those planes, and shooting down the enemies, right? And he passed away a number of years ago. He was an unbelievable guy. But he used to say, you know what the perfect business is? Own a toll booth. He said, because people just come through and give you money, right? He said, other than that, there's no perfect business. And that's so important, because every business has warts. Every business has blemishes. They all have problems. You could mitigate. I believe, I teach people how to eliminate the risk when buying a business. There's always a smaller element, but you can mitigate for everything. I interviewed this guy, Iggy Domagowski, who bought my course. He's since bought 10 businesses, built them up to over $200 million, sold out, runs a $2 billion company now. I had a beautiful call with him a couple of weeks ago. And that was one of his biggest things, was you have to get past like some of the shit, right? There's some businesses that just have a little bit of a problem to them, or they're not perfect. They have pimples, they have warts. It's unavoidable. So those are the three things, again, which is you got to be prepared. You got to have the knowledge. Make sure you understand and get really in touch with what type of business marries perfect with your best skill set, because that's when And that's the business you need to buy. And forget about this perfect business. It doesn't exist. Similar to what the point you made about negotiations, that there's some things you just have to get past.
Love that. Love that. Man, that is great knowledge share, great bombs right there. So, Richard, obviously you've got courses, you've got products. Like, where is the best place for my listeners if they're looking at potentially going out and acquiring a business? Like, where do we go to learn more from you and maybe follow you, buy your book? What's the best route?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. So my main website is richardparker.com. It's really easy to remember that, richardparker.com. And it's also, that was the main character in the movie The Life of Pi, the Bengal Tiger. If you saw that beautiful movie, it was
Nice.
the Bengal Tiger's name was Richard Parker as well. On that site, you find I have tons of free articles. I only have one course. I have some industry specific guides, but only one course. I just don't believe in people buying something, then upselling them to consultation. Then I'm like, quote, mastermind group, unquote. That's just not my nature. So my main program, which is how to buy a good business at a great price, it's under $200. The other thing that 550 pages, covers the entire buying process, what people need to know, what to do and how to do it. And the other thing that I offer people is the single biggest thing that I missed when I was making my early acquisitions. I had nobody to talk to. I had no mentor. I had no expert. I couldn't bounce some ideas off people. And so when I launched this program, which was never done to turn into a business, I'm still stunned that it turned into the business that it has. I don't do this for the money. Thank God I don't need the money. Try to make it very affordable, but I let anybody who buys our course, you can email me anytime. I'll answer your questions. I spend the whole day answering questions and emails. I'll get onto the phone with our clients to help them negotiate a deal or guide them or provide them information. So, if you want to read a ton of great articles, they're all free. It's on the website, richardparker.com, and you can navigate your way to the course on there. But either way, you're going to have to find some great information on there.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Couple last questions for you. So outside of your course, outside of your book, what are a couple books that have changed your life that you can recommend to the audience?
I think one of them, from philosophically a life type book, is Man's Search for Meaning, which was written by Viktor Frankl. Great book. Business book. Two actually. I read? I read constantly. From Good to Great by Jim Collins, which is a terrific book. I only bought it originally when I saw it on the bookstore shelf because the title was similar to my course, right? I have How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price. I see the thing called From Good to Great. It's a fantastic book, a must read. The E-Myth by Michael Gerber is a terrific book because that really programs you to understand how to duplicate a business and also how to duplicate yourself, because so many small businesses, the assets leave at 5 o'clock with the owner, right? And this teaches you, or it'll open up your eyes a little bit. And of course, the book by my cherished and dear friend Ray, Principles, I think is an absolute must read for anybody, regardless whether or not they're working for somebody, or going into their own business. It's a very, very interesting view on many subjects related to work and relationships that make you a better person. I mean, that there's no doubt. So those would be the ones I would.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those. Those are all fantastic books. I actually haven't had the chance to read the Ray one, and I'm excited to pick up a copy of that and either listen or read to that. Last question. Some maybe habits that you've had in your personal life and business that have really helped transform you over time. What are some of your top habits?
I'm neurotically organized, and I think that's really important. I mean, I'm an old school guy, so I still use a day timer.
Love it.
But I'm meticulously organized, and I probably, and so that's always been very important for me. I think from habits, which is more philosophical. I've evolved over the years, because I think when I was younger, it might have been ego or insecurity. Probably played into this, but as time went on, understanding that surrounding yourself with more talented people that are bigger, better, and faster than you, is really the way to go. And when I was younger, I couldn't do that. And again, I allude to the fact it was probably my ego and insecurity, because I was a young boss. And you learn as you get older, and hopefully you evolve. And I don't look at that way. So, hiring good people, and surrounding themselves with that talent is good. So like, to me, if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm in the wrong room. I like to be
Right.
wrong. I want to be the dummy in the room. I think focusing, like, this concept of I I'm going to blank a great blank by doing the following. Like, I've tried to use that phrase to myself, whatever it is, and that is, I'm going to build a great business by doing the following, or I'm going
Right.
to have a great relationship with my wife by doing the following, or I'm going to be a great friend to so and so by doing the following. And by I think what's happened because of that is, like, I don't focus on the money. Like,
Yeah.
pardon my French, I don't give a shit about the money. I never have
Right.
in anything that I've done. I need to live, I need to eat. But I think if you focus on not being right, if you focus on getting it right, or doing it right, and doing right by people, like, the money and the gratification just happens by default. So I think,
Yep.
that philosophically, and maybe sounds a little bit too altruistic, but it's really paid dividends for me, has really been, guiding principle, of conducting myself in that way. And I'm not holier than thou. I appreciate you telling, saying to people I'm down to earth guy. I like to think that I am, but that sort of idea, and some of it comes with evolution. You get older, right? You just chill out a little bit. It's not so important to be right. You got to embrace being wrong, because that's when you learn, right? You got to embrace rejection, right? Know how to deal with it, and, dust
Absolutely.
yourself off. So all those things, but a lot of them just come a little later in life.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you sharing those. Like, I connect very much with those principles, those habits. Money not being the driver. I'm 100% on board with everything you just shared. So, Richard, thank you so much for your time today. I know it's very precious, very valuable. You've dropped incredible knowledge. Thank you so much. Until next time.